Good afternoon.
Good
Good to have you here.
Thank you.
Joining us, we have Andrew Malcolm, President of Funeral Directors Association of New Zealand, and Boyes, the Chief Executive. I'm Sam Uffendale, Chair of the Health Committee. You'll see a number of members around the table here. It's very good to have you here. Thank you for coming and to join us. We have you for 20 minutes. And so I will hand that time over to you shortly. You may use as you wish. If you want to leave us time for questions at the end, that would be helpful, but 20 minutes all up. So over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sam. Well, tēnā koutou katoa, and thank you for the opportunity to present to you today. I'm Andrew Malcolm, a funeral director of over 40 years. I am the owner of Kapiti Coast Funeral Home just up the line here, and also the current president of the Funeral Directors Association of New Zealand.
And I'm Gillian Boyes. I'm Chief Executive of the Funeral Directors Association. We wanted to start by just providing a little bit of background about our organisation, and then Andrew will talk about some ways we think perhaps this committee could be thinking about some changes to ensure better outcomes and death care for all New Zealanders. So the Funeral Directors Association, we're a membership organisation. We represent around 3/4 of the funeral homes across New Zealand. Prospective members must meet our criteria, including having qualified staff and meeting our standards. And I've included a copy of our standards with your pack. You'll see they're quite comprehensive and cover a wide range of areas. Our members range from very small family firms, perhaps just a couple running a funeral home, through to very large funeral homes with multiple locations, such as Legacy Funerals you might be familiar with, Sam in Tauranga,
Yes.
Lamb and Hayward in Canterbury, Dr. Campbell. So ones that many of you will be familiar with. Over half our members are New Zealand based, New Zealand owned rather, with the remainder owned by Australian firms Invacare and Propel, but all operating under local brands with local staff. And it's probably worth noting in terms of the total funeral homes across New Zealand, the Australian owned companies make up currently 28% of funeral homes. And I guess we just disproportionately include numbers of Australian owned funeral homes within our membership because they really value the high standards that we promote. Select Committee members will be aware there's no public provision of funeral service in New Zealand. So together our members and other non-member firms provide 24/7 service across the country to whānau at their most difficult time. They do this with compassion and the utmost respect for families, while also juggling the challenge of running, often small businesses with the same cost of living challenges that all New Zealand is facing. They provide a caring, respectful and professional approach, not just for the families in bereavement, but also for the bodies or te papaku in their care. And yet these professionals are sometimes vilified or branded predatory because they must charge for these services in order to keep offering them. Our members provide support through the grief journey and provide a wide range of services at all price points. This is a professional industry. It's operating well for all cultures in our country, including opportunities for those who want to do some or all of the death care service themselves. It's not broken, but we do think there are opportunities for government to improve its legislation and policies to support it, most notably by completing the review of the 1964 Burial and Cremations Act, which began back in 2010.
I can talk for a long time, so I've written some notes, so I won't. So I just wanted to begin by taking you through some of the challenges we face. The first is really our operating costs. As you know, there's a lot of talk about the cost of funerals at the moment. There always is when there's a downturn in the economy. I've been through 2 of those, and the same discussions come up during those sorts of periods. Gillian has explained that we are private businesses having to cover all the usual operating expenses, but we're not like a typical office or a shop. We have facilities like chapels, auditoriums, mortuaries, catering lounges, viewing suites, garaging, deceased storage, graphic design suites. In fact, we are really, in essence, events centres, and that's why our operating expenses, one of the reasons they're high. On top of that, there's usual insurance for that sort of plant. Mine alone this year was over $60,000 just for insurance. There's compliance costs, including council consents, annual registrations, health and safety costs, professional development, chemical handling certificates, etc. Staffing costs, these make up 25 to 35% of our overheads. And remembering that our staff in New Zealand are not hugely paid. Everyone thinks that you're a funeral director, so you get a lot of money. Our staff are okay paid when we've looked at our pay scales, but they are really hard workers. It's a vocation where often people are working 24/7 on shifts, etc. The last bit of costs I wanted to point out was cremation services. Many funeral homes now need to have crematorium to function, with the cost of plant and buildings in the vicinity of 1.5 to 1.8 million. This is due to council cremators in New Zealand being very old, proven by the recent RMA reviews, which outlined this. Councils seem reluctant to invest, and when they do, there's instances such as in my area, Porirua, where they simply closed the crematorium for 6 months while they did an update. And a similar thing happened in Tauranga, and when they reopened, they increased the price by 50% to the public. So these are the challenges we're trying to work against. So what can government do to help us with costs of funerals? I've got 3 major points. The first one is price transparency. We recommended the changes in the Burial and Cremation Act review for more price transparency. In fact, our standards, which you have a copy of, mean that all of our members have to be price transparent. But remembering our members don't make up all the funeral homes in New Zealand. So there are funeral homes that are not price transparent, and we would like to see the regulation changed so that price transparency is a requirement for all funeral homes. Increasing the asset testing limit is the second point for prepaid funerals. We encourage people to come to a funeral home before they're facing a death so they can talk with us. Often we see people over many instances, often over many years, discussing the type of funeral that would help their families in grief. And we spend quite a bit of time talking about funding that and the types of funerals and how much they would cost, etc. So to achieve that, we often end up with a prepaid funeral, and there's prepaid funeral plans. We don't hold those funds ourselves. But the asset testing limit for rest home care subsidy is $10,000. Now, for particularly some cultural groups, that's not enough for a funeral, but that tends to be the amount they put aside because that's what the government amount has been set as for that asset testing and has been for as long as I can remember. So we feel that that should be increased. I think there should be a jump perhaps to about $15,000, but I also think we should be sensible going forward and put a CPI index on that so this doesn't happen again. The third point I wanted to raise was the increase in work and income funeral grant. We've campaigned and championed this for quite a while. Again, this was set a very long time ago, and we realise this isn't within your committee remit, so we're just sort of pushing it in there so you can at least suggest this to others. The reason we think it should be increased really is it used to many years ago cover about half a funeral. They were very specific on the items that they would cover. With small increments over time, it now covers very little. In fact, those most vulnerable, the Maori and Pacific communities and the elderly, are the ones who use this grant the most. And for them, it often only covers a cremation, no service. So they don't get that chance to grieve as a corporate group. And the other point is that some of those families who are culturally required to have a burial, and I've got some stories I won't share about that, but the culturally required to have a burial, the average burial cost in New Zealand, when we look at our figures, is about $4,300. So at a $2,500 grant, doesn't even cover the cost of the plot, let alone any other need that they would have around a funeral. So if they have no funds, they haven't even got enough to buy a burial plot, so they're being forced into cremation. Paperwork and processes. Previous presenters have raised concerns about the paperwork process, and I think the major one there was about the medical referee system. This is a process by which the public are required to make an application, but the medical referee has to sign off that application along with the medical doctor's papers. So it's a double check, if you like, an independent referee. These medical referees are approved by the Director General of Health. It is currently a very good system is mostly electronic now, and that is best practice, but it's not reflected in the regulations. In fact, we really are working outside the regulations. The regulations talk about delivering a certificate in a plain envelope to the referee. Well, all of ours are electronic now. We register on DIA, we can get the documents from the Department of Internal Affairs, and we can forward those on to the referee along with those applications for the family. So we would urge officials to update cremation regulations to accommodate modern cremation systems, such as the video conferencing that we used during COVID to verify death. This worked very well and lifted a lot of stress on families, but it was only a temporary exemption. So we'd like to see things like this entrenched back in regulation. A final point for the committee is to consider the ever-changing needs and wishes around funerals and disposal methods in New Zealand. Currently, the law stifles the innovation of body disposal methods. Modern death care technologies such as water cremation or human composting allowed in other places around the world, but are denied in our law in New Zealand. We've spoken with officials who have applications on their desks right now for these methods, but they can't allow them because the Burials and Cremation Act doesn't enable this. We think this regulation should be enabled and any other future alternative disposal methods. So in summary, funeral homes and Aotearoa New Zealand already provide a high level of professional care in our communities. Consumers have a wide range of price points, including flexibility in law for those who want to do as much or as little as they want themselves. The Burial and Cremation Act, point 2, needs to be completed. Our association, along with others in the industry, have provided helpful and constructive feedback, and the direction is largely there. We've highlighted today some specific points we think need addressing. I think our key message really is we need to get on with modernising this regulation. Please talk with your colleagues. That's my final point, and it's really not for you, but please talk to them in other select committees about sensible financial changes to help the most vulnerable, including a higher asset testing exemption with some sort of CPI adjustment, and a more realistic WINZ funeral grant that recognises the need for families to grieve in culturally appropriate ways. Ngā mihi, and thank you for listening.
Thank you. Jenny.
Question, during sort of the COVID period that we all would like to not remember too vividly, when people were dying, a lot of were being put on ice, bodies, tūpapaku were being put on ice. Is that still a practice that's around at the moment? Is there much of that?
Put on ice is a really interesting statement. I was on the board then and had a lot of talks with Ministry of Health. They sort of banned embalming at the beginning for some weird reason. They thought we shouldn't touch the bodies. However, embalming actually kills a virus.
Yeah.
Putting a body in a fridge with a virus doesn't kill a virus. It just puts it to sleep. So we advocated for embalming to come back, and so it was. The point during COVID was more around people not being allowed to have funerals.
Correct.
And we found very innovative ways, such as I shared about the doctors being able to not go and see the deceased to tūpapaku, but actually take a video conference of that deceased and then do their ID that way. That's been in temporary regulation since, which is now expiring, and we'd like to see it entrenched in law. The other little piece about COVID really was those people who weren't allowed funerals were desperate to have something when the time was right. And we were able to facilitate that in a lot of really unique ways.
So any positive changes that came out of that in terms of having to, like I know I've heard of some families who've, because people can't, come back from overseas, they actually put the tūpapaku in a fridge and then just get here when they get it and then hold the funeral later rather than what previously would have.
So a fridge wouldn't last that long, but embalming would. Yes, so if you embalm the deceased, you can keep them for months, depending on the embalming.
And is that
stage.
sort of thing happening? Just
It hasn't happened now more than it did before. We've always had that where people have come back from overseas. And it's a wonderful thing to be able to do. One of my favourite stories is a daughter that's lost her mother and she didn't know mum had died. She was in Africa and the lawyer said, can you keep her for a couple of months because we don't want to make decisions. She's an only daughter. And when she turned up 6 weeks later, we didn't even know she was in the country. She walked in the front door of the funeral home. I'd said hi to her mum every morning that I turned the lights on because she was not in the fridge. She was just lying in state. And when she said, I need to see my mother now, I said, oh, great, come with me. And I took her straight in to see her.
All right, we're going to go Usher and then Kim.
The key question I took from some of the earlier presenters on this issue was, concerns were raised about cost, but to be honest, my concern is this: is the regulatory system forcing people into commercial options when they would like to pursue non-commercial options? That's the question. Then there exists a market for the commercial options, and that's fine. So that's what brings me to the point about the cremation documentation. Can you talk us through the practicalities of handling that cremation documentation, which I think some of the previous submitters feel that ties the people into, or loved ones of a deceased person, into using a commercial operator when they would like another choice?
Yes and no. It depends. I think the answer to that is a little bit about how techno-savvy they are. In the old days, it was a lot easier in the sense of being able to take a form to the crematorium and searching out that medical referee in practical terms by getting in your car and driving. Now it's probably a lot easier, but you have to be techno-savvy. In other words, you need to be able to actually register through the MyIR, so you can actually get on the DIY website as a funeral director. Now that sounds really weird, but I'll explain that in a minute. And you need to be able to download those documents, which you can once you're registered, and you need to be able to contact a medical referee and send it to that medical referee. So it's more of a techno question. If you're more technically advanced, which is where it's all going, it's probably easier. There's less driving around.
So in your view, that the regulatory system enables that to happen at the moment, and then it's a matter of someone's ability to use the website and so on.
Well, funnily enough, the regulatory system doesn't even allow that technological stuff. It's still talking about plain envelopes delivering to referees, which you can still do. So there's no reason why people doing DIY and can't still do that. You don't have to use the electronic system. It's just that 95% of the doctors do, 95% of us register online, 95% of us use medical referees that way. So you just have to be techno-savvy.
And certainly one of the other points we've raised is probably the forms need some simplifying, because even the medical professionals get it wrong all the time. So perhaps if the regulatory system could have a look at, what is actually required and what forms you put with what, I'm sure we could make some user improvements, and that would open it up to more people being able to use those forms as well.
Cam?
Yeah, so thank you, Aisha. That was along the lines of what I was asking, but so to carry on with that a little bit, do you think, and perhaps agree with previous submitters, that we need to update, that this committee should be looking better at, more in depth at the paperwork system and what's driving people into using medical professional or having medical professionals sort of take over the situation at the end of life?
Yep.
And do you think that's something we should be looking
I
at?
think we definitely should be looking at the systems and the forms and the Act. I don't think we should be pushing anything more on medical doctors.
Okay.
They're already busy enough. It's hard enough. We get calls from them actually all the time.
And so another question is, there's been issues raised about areas having a monopoly of crematoriums.
Yeah.
So, I mean, how much cost is imposed because of that, do you think? And how could we open it up so that you can use a more crematorium access across the country rather than being right in a geographic area?
Well, I think the regulation's already quite simple. You can go anywhere.
All right.
There's just this weird human thing that I live on the Kapiti Coast, so I have to use someone on the Kapiti Coast. I did a funeral in Wellington last week, and the family were going, "Oh, if we'd known, we would have used you for Dad." You can go into any crematorium anywhere. You can shop around, you can find the best price, you can find the people who are open the best hours. A company in Porirua uses us a lot of the time. They bypass Porirua because we're open all hours.
So we've got time for one more.
Just to sup on Dr. Verrill's question, given your answer, do you think through no fault of the funeral industry, the effect of the regulations is to create a bit of a duopoly when it comes to how people are able to access getting their loved ones to that very last stage? I'm just trying to see if this is is that the impact as you see it through no fault of anybody, but through the regulation?
I don't think it's through the regulation. I think it's just probably more through funeral directors doing a fantastic job. I mean, it might sound very pious, but you know, we care for people in our community so well that people just default to you. We're quite open about trying to encourage people to DIY. We do it with them all the time. I had a funeral last week. They kept ringing me saying, we're doing this all ourselves. And by the way, what else do I have to do about it? You know, really DIY. Some companies would not answer them. Some companies would say, no, you want to do it yourself, you find your own information out.
Is it conceivable that in some areas where there isn't that openness, that the impact would be to lock those people out of doing it yourself? Because I
think
imagine
they
it's varied through the
Yeah,
country.
I think they would get that impression in some areas, but again, you can use you can go bypass one town and go to the next and you'll find a good operator.
It's also a really human thing, isn't it? It's really hard to deal with death. We're not used to doing it. And, you know, if it's an unexpected death, that might be really difficult, you know, because you're grieving, you can't make the right decisions, you don't want to do it. So the you know, guiding through the journey by a funeral director is valued and required.
We're at time, sorry.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much for coming in today.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.